This car has been sitting for pretty much the past 20 years. Old, faded, crusty, and generally gross. But enough about your mom, we're here to talk about the car. The year is 1978. Space Invaders just came out, the Village People released the song that will plague every public function for the rest of history, and this car right here rolled off the assembly line in Hiratsuka, Japan. But clearly, it's been a long time since this guy's last been there. A lot of good vehicle rescue stories start just like this, the car surrounded by greenery and often other relics of the past. However, this isn't where, nor when, this story starts. If you've ever wondered why there's sometimes such large gaps in between uploads on my channel, it's often because of things like waiting on parts, dealing with unforeseen mishaps, or in the case of part 5 of the Fiero Restoration series here, finishing up my last semester of college. However, another factor contributing to that episode's delay was me distracting myself with another project. But this particular Z-car popped up on Facebook Marketplace for only $4,800. Given that it looked really good and was supposedly running well, that was an abnormally low price for these cars, so I bolted off to go see it. And the car was pretty much a time capsule. It's very close to factory original, with the only real mods being wheels and louvers. The paint was a little rougher than expected, but the interior was damn near flawless. So why was this car priced so low? Well, for starters, none of the tires were holding air, one wheel looked to be dented in and like someone tried straightening it back out with a hammer, which is a huge no-no for alloy wheels, and of course there's also the rust. Lots of little holes rotted out, which usually means more rust hiding deep inside the chassis where you can't see it. And frame rails that were crumpled in, and in some places just peeling off the car.
Oh my god, that's actually terrifying.
But the icing on the cake is that this car has been parked for the past 17 years and actually does not run. The guy selling it now has only owned it for 2 of those 17 years it's been sitting, meaning he bought it as a project and gave up on it, which usually isn't a good sign. But supposedly he did get it to run after replacing the fuel pump, but that was 2 years ago, and as expected, the battery in the car was as dead as a doornail. Even with the jump box, it wouldn't start. Almost everything about it screamed, "Don't buy it." What I thought was going to be just a cool old car was turning out to be a cool old project. And given that I was already in over my head with one basket case, the idea of overwhelming myself even more than I already was with another wasn't exactly appealing. But I said almost everything screamed "don't buy it," because I was handed this. What it is a detailed account of every purchase ever made for the car, every repair, every oil change, every tune-up and fill-up is all right here. This is the car's entire life story documented in such great detail. I know the louvers were bought from Sears in 1981, and that the car had to be repainted because it was vandalized in 1983. Sometimes you might find a manila folder full of receipts when you buy a used car, but this, it's just priceless. The original owner really, truly cared about this car, and time has been the only thing unkind to it. And I don't know if it was something I was telling myself was an excuse to buy the car, but the idea of someone else buying it, only to forget about it too, just didn't sit right with me. Despite all the work it needed, and despite a prior red 1980s obligation, I bought the car. Now, convincing my parents to let me dump yet another vehicle onto their property wasn't actually too difficult, since my dad actually has a soft spot for these cars. back when my older brother was teeny tiny, my dad had a 280ZX, and before that, 2 different 280Zs when he was in college. And he was so excited about this car that not only did he come with me to check it out, but he also offered to pay for half of it, which is insanely generous. And on top of that, we were able to knock $300 off the asking price down to $4,500 and got the seller to deliver it to us free of charge. The only thing that could make this a better deal than it already was if I could get the car to run. I had an old battery lying around that wasn't as old as the one in the car, but since it had the positive and negative terminals swapped around, I couldn't install it in the car, so I had to run it in parallel with the original one with jumper cables. Also on there is the vintage Sears battery charger. But it's probably going to need more than 5 minutes to fully charge, Ronnie. Have some patience. But it also didn't help that the little plastic piece on the brake pedal that presses up against the switch was missing, causing the brake lights to just constantly be on, wasting power. But I'm sure my multiple premature attempts to start the car before it was fully charged was the biggest drain. After about an hour though, okay. Only needing a charged battery to get this thing going was best case scenario. And it sounds pretty good. I mean, maybe. It's got kind of a tractory vibe to it. I mean, there's gotta be a million vacuum leaks, but it runs. So the next step is to get a proper battery in here. To my surprise, the battery tray was in great condition. A lot of the time on old cars, my Fiero included, you'll find these just completely deteriorated due to leaking battery acid, but aside from just housing lots of trash, this one looked pretty dang good. I went and picked up a new battery, but it had to be modified in order to get the hold down bracket to fit over top of it. And the hold down bracket itself had to be modified from this to this in order to get it to bolt down, since this battery is actually taller than the old one. But with it in now, the car should start up a lot easier.
Hey, let's check the coolant. We've never checked the coolant before.
You don't need coolant to run an engine.
Well,
for a few seconds it should be.
not for a few seconds, but we've run it for more than a few seconds.
The longer we listened to it though, the less good it actually sounded. There was some hesitation when opening the throttle, and that popping, which is more than likely backfire. Oh, and pressing the AC button just immediately kills the engine. However, none of those things should prevent the car from driving. To take care of the brake light draining the battery issue though, because that's still happening, I snapped in a little metal hole plug I got from the hardware store to fill the void in the pedal. And with it actually pressing the switch now, the lights are off. After that, I spent some time jacking, and then went back out to the car and raised it up. Seeing as how I don't have superhuman strength, but I'm still able to depress the clutch pedal with a single finger, there must be something wrong with the hydraulic system. Hoping that it only needed to be rebled, I started syringing out the old fluid and replacing it with new fluid. But right when I was about to crack open the bleeder screw on the slave cylinder, and hopefully get this thing working again, I noticed a big old gaping hole in the rubber line. No driving today. So, while I waited on a replacement hose to arrive, I wanted to go ahead and address the wheel situation, which honestly I should have done before trying to drive the car anyways. It was at this point, unfortunately, that I realized not just one wheel was dented in, but every wheel was. The one with the hammer marks was just the worst offender, but yeah, no, they're all out of round. No, I don't know how either. But for a little over $300, a local wheel repair place had the tools and experience to get these back into their ideal circular shape. And after stopping to get some new tires installed too, these are now good to go. Clearly, I just got these repaired, not refinished. I'm not trying to break the bank on this project just yet, so getting them re-diamond cut around the lip will have to come later. And while I have these wheel cavities still visible, I wanted to take this moment to make note of every single worn out or faulty component here. That way later when I'm driving the car, I knew what to lie to myself about and pretend wasn't an issue. Not too long after the wheels went on, the new clutch parts came in. Now the hydraulic line was the only thing obviously damaged, but a new master and slave cylinder were so affordable that I just went ahead and bought them too. And it's a pretty good thing that I did, because after undoing the hydraulic line up top with absolutely the wrong tool, and removing both the master and slave cylinder, it was easy to see just how trashed these parts were. The new master is springy and actually plunging, while the original one, yeah. Installation of these new parts is just the reverse of disassembly, but let me just say it's a lot easier to take off the linkage for the master cylinder that connects to the pedal than it is to put it back on.
Oh my god!
That's the worst positioning, like, ever.
Yeah.
There's
no other way to do it.
But luckily the slave cylinder just bolts right up.
Okay.
And after attaching the new line and bleeding the system with help from my friends,
Is it going down, Jake?
Oh, it just did.
Yeah?
Yeah, a lot.
Okay, good.
pressing in the pedal is finally actuating the clutch fork. So, this thing should theoretically be good to drive. After a quick test to make sure it's releasing properly and straightening out, my friend Josh and I were off on our maiden voyage.
Alright, brake test. Well, we stopped so slowly and I was slamming on the brakes.
Alright.
I'm gonna make sure the wheels are tight.
That's a good idea.
Right away, I could tell that suspension-wise, this thing is surprisingly very smooth. It handles remarkably well. But that's where the positives both start and end.
How you feeling?
Alive so far.
Yeah.
Oh, slamming the brakes.
But you stopped.
We barely stopped, but we did.
Don't get me wrong, this was so much fun to drive, especially considering that it was the first time it's been back on the road in 17 years, but there were so many creaks, squeaks, rattles, clunks, and pops. Unless you're deaf or hard of hearing, this would not be at all calming to be in. But even then, the brakes still really suck. When we came back home, the front right caliper was actually smoking and the wheel extremely hot. That didn't deter my dad from driving the car though, because he took off on the thing before I could get in with him. I actually went outside and realized he was gone right before he was coming back in.
So what did you
Not
think?
bad. Not bad at all. It actually shifted great. I put it in all gears and definitely running rough. But yeah, I definitely think it's restorable. Felt like the old days. No, it felt smooth. I mean, definitely smelling some gas. It has that same interior smell you had all those years ago with the Z-Car. I remember mine, so I had my first one probably like in 1984, and it was only like at that point 11 years old, but it already seemed old, you know? So Oh, sorry, it would have been like 7 years old, right? Anyway, yeah, very impressive. I think we'll have fun doing this.
And I don't know if it was something I was telling myself was an excuse to buy the car, but the idea of someone else buying it, only to forget about it too, just didn't sit right with me. So it's been a few days since I've last worked on the Z, around 1,300 days to be exact, but who's counting? Like I said in the beginning of this video, I was in the middle of the Fiero restoration when I bought this car, and in an attempt to help me focus, I promised myself I would just get the car running and not do any more work on it until after I finished the Fiero, however many months that would take. Well, it took over 2 years, and by that point, I was so done with cars that I took a bit of a breather and worked on a motorcycle. But that too snowballed into something much larger than initially planned, taking over a year there as well. All this time, the Z has been in the background, just sitting and sitting. Until now. I am finally ready to give the car some much needed attention. If you're wondering why I'm moving it, well, that's because I no longer live with my parents. And if you're wondering why it has to be trailered, well, that's because the Z no longer lives at all. It no longer lives. It doesn't run anymore. And with that front right brake still locked up, it's a real pain to move around. As Elise and I were struggling to move it under the carport, our mailman actually came by and helped push, which was super cool of him. The car wasn't exactly in the best condition when we got it, but 3.5 years later is just so much worse. And it's kind of my fault. A lot of the exterior degradation can be attributed to sometimes being left outdoors. As I shared in one of my Patreon update videos from years ago, I often had to move the Z around to make room for other stuff, but 95% of the time it was in the garage or the barn, but sometimes had to be left outside, allowing the minimal rest on the hood to expand into maximal rest, and for rainstorms to pretty much just throw water into the trunk cavity due to the giant rust holes, which pretty much ruined everything back there. Oh, and that winter storm of 2021 that left millions of Texans without power, water, and heat for days also happened one of the few times the car was left outside. Talk about bad timing, but to make matters worse, the fuel pump has since burnt out, the battery sulfated and is maxing out at 10.8 volts, and every single injector in this godforsaken trash pile of an EFI system was gummed up with old fuel. It took 2 full days of diagnosing and fixing everything just to get the car back to where it originally was 3.5 years ago. Honestly, it's probably not even running as well as it was then. I was just barely able to limp the car over to the tree line in my backyard to get a more aesthetically pleasing backdrop for some B-roll. And honestly, for this video's thumbnail. Clearly, I've got a lot of work ahead of me. However, I'm kind of at an impasse on what exactly I want this project to be. On one hand, the car is pretty much a time capsule. It is damn near close to factory original, with only a few mods here and there done during the 80s. So I feel like I shouldn't touch the thing. I feel like I should keep it exactly how it is and only change what I absolutely have to. Things like seals, bushings, brakes, suspension components, and the consumables, basically. Or, on the other hand, I could actually make this car the project that I want it to be and not what I feel like it should be. I would love to make this thing look damn perfect, meaning I'm not gonna paint the car, and just do what I want to do to it, not what I feel like should be done, like I said. But I don't know. I feel like there's valid arguments for both sides, so I'm gonna have to think about this one. And I kinda have time to think about it because right now the workshop is actually not Z-Car ready. Yeah, it's kinda just still a garage, but soon to be a proper workshop. And after that, this car is going under the knife. So, thank you so much for joining me on what is probably going to be another multi-year long journey. Until next time, I'll see you guys later.
Okay.